Alrighty. So if you remember at the end of chapter 20, we had like a little bit of a cliffhanger, right? Calpurnia comes walking up the aisle at the courthouse. So the children have been caught, right? They're not supposed to be at the trial, but Alexandra has noticed that they are missing and that they're gone. And so Calpurnia comes looking for them. And comes to tell Atticus that they're missing. But of course, Mr. Underwood is like, yep, they're right up there. They've been there all afternoon, right? So Atticus obviously, didn't necessarily look up there, didn't see them. They've been quiet, etc. Okay. So the jury has gone out to deliberate. Okay, and if you don't know a ton about jury trials, in most jury trials, the jury has to be unanimous. Okay, so every single person has to agree. Either everyone says that you're guilty or everyone says that you're not guilty. And if the jury can't come to a unanimous decision, then it's what's called a hung jury. And then they have to do the whole trial over again. Okay, because it's okay. It's the state's job to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did the crime. And then it's the defense's job to try to create that reasonable doubt, right? To try to make the jury doubt what the prosecution is saying, okay? So Jem is very confident that Tom is going to be acquitted, which means found not guilty. Okay. Every single person in their journals, in person and virtual, all said that they would find him not guilty. But obviously, we are looking at this from a 21st century perspective where we're just looking at the facts and we don't have the same prejudices that were ingrained in people and were expected in society at that time. Okay. So Atticus does allow them to come back and hear the verdict. What's his reasoning for that? Mm-hmm. Okay, he wants, it's important for them to be able to see it. Plus, which like he kind of says that they've already heard everything. They heard all the testimony. So what's hearing the verdict? It's not going to be too much. The jury does take a long time to deliberate. Okay, and so they take this as a good sign. Why would that be a good sign if the jury is taking a long time to deliberate? Okay. Yeah, it lets us know that like Atticus's defense was good and had an impact, right? If the jury just goes out and then they're going to come right back, then that means everybody already agrees, right? And in this case, it would be everyone agreeing that he's guilty, most likely. But because the jury is out for a long time, that means that they're really debating it, right? That there's at least one person who's like, I don't know, he might be innocent. And even though to us, like we think so clearly, we look at the evidence, we're like, he doesn't have a left hand. How would he possibly have done this crime when she has like, bruising all around her neck? His story makes more sense, etc. All these things, there's no physical evidence to prove that he did this. To us, of course, we're like, of course he's not guilty. But at that time, we just have to remember just what the society was like and what the culture was like at that time of like a white woman would inherently be believed over a black man at that time, just because of their race. So the fact that there's even someone in there who's like even considering that Tom could be innocent is a good sign. However, regardless of that, he is still found guilty, right? So if you remember the Scottsboro Boys case that we talked about before we started reading, this is very similar to what happened in that circumstance. There was no evidence to support the crime had been committed, but the boys were still found guilty. Tom is still found guilty here. So in the last chapter, one of your questions asked about like, is the court actually the great equalizer? Like everyone should be treated equally in court. But clearly we see in this circumstance that that does not happen, right? Because Tom is not being treated equally. They aren't looking at just the facts. They're being swayed by their prejudice, by their stereotypes, by their sort of racist, like just society and upbringing, okay? So justice, I would definitely say, is not served here because Tom is clearly innocent, but he is found guilty, okay? All right, so then chapter 22 is kind of the fallout of this guilty verdict, okay? So there's a few quotes that I want to draw your attention to. The first one is on page 285, and there's actually several things that Atticus says here. Jem is crying, right, because of how unfair this is, right? If you remember, this is a coming of age novel. So Jem kind of in chapter 21 is showing a little bit of still like boyish innocence, like, yeah, they're going to acquit him. I know they will, right? Thinking like the best of people. And then he's very, very disillusioned when Tom is found guilty. So he is crying in this chapter. He's very upset. Jem says in the middle of the page, actually, sorry, I'm going to start at the top of the page. So Aunt Alexandra is mad at Atticus for letting the kids go and see the trial. And Atticus says, this is their home, sister. We've made it this way for them. They might as well learn to cope with it. And then Jem says, how could they do it? How could they? And Atticus says, I don't know, but they did. They've done it before, and they did it tonight, and they'll do it again. And when they do it, it seems that only the children weep. And then he also says that the verdict, sorry, this is up at the top of the page again. He says, it's as much Macomb County as missionary teas. So he's basically saying like, our kids have to understand that this is like what's going on in our community, in our society. They have to learn to cope with it, right? It's not good. He obviously thinks that this is a bad thing, but he's like, their eyes need to be opened that this is, you know, it's not just this idealistic, you know, I don't know, sort of optimistic view of the world. Like he's very sort of disillusioned himself right here because he had really hoped that maybe possibly they, you know, would get this right. And so he's just kind of, again, talking about sort of the sort of history of the prejudice in their town and how it's continuing on. And he says, you know, the point about only the children weep is sort of that thought of, you know, maybe the future can be different. Like maybe the children can see the injustice in this, and maybe the children then can learn to be more tolerant, right? So sort of like that idea that maybe the future generations can be better. Okay. He does also mention that they're going to appeal. Okay. So when a court case occurs after the verdict, defendants can appeal their decision of the court based on different things. So they can say that like their constitutional rights were not upheld. There's several different things that people can appeal based off of. So he is saying they're going to appeal that. And when you appeal, so like this case was held in Macomb County, right, at the Macomb County Courthouse. If you appeal, you're appealing to the next higher decision, like the next higher court. So it would be like maybe like a state court, right, for the state of Alabama. And then you could appeal further than that and go to a US district court. And then you could appeal further. And that's how cases eventually get to the Supreme Court as you appeal and appeal and appeal. But so his thought is that, okay, well, Macomb County is this way, but if we appeal, you know, maybe we can get a jury that's going to be a little bit less prejudiced. And that might actually listen to the actual testimony instead of just, you know, taking what Mayella says it as the truth. Okay, so he is planning to appeal. The Black community brings all sorts of food and other things just to show their appreciation to him, which he finds very touching. And this chapter is really big for Jem's transformation, right? From like very childlike to being more mature. You see in page 286, at the bottom of the page, he kind of tells Dill, like he kind of tries to put Dill in line. He says, Dill, you've got to stop going off without telling her. It just aggravates her, right? So kind of like trying to be more of the peacekeeper versus like, you know, in the beginning of the book, that wouldn't have been what Jem would say to Dill, right? So he's kind of taking on more adult roles. And then also on page 288, he is talking about Maycomb, and he says towards the bottom of the page, it's like being a caterpillar in a cocoon. That's what it is. Like something asleep wrapped up in a warm place. I always thought Maycomb folks were the best folks in the world. At least that's what they seemed like. Right. So again, that very like idealistic childlike view of the world. And then that's kind of been pulled back because of this trial. And he sees that people are not necessarily what he thought they were, or that people in Maycomb were not as necessarily good as he thought they were. Okay. We also then learn, Miss Maudie tells us that this is at the top of page 289, right? Because Jem is like, no one did anything to help Tom, right? Like, this is so unfair. And Miss Maudie points out that there are people who did, right? She says, people like us, people like Judge Taylor, people like Mr. Hectate. Did it ever strike you that Judge Taylor naming Atticus to defend that boy was no accident, that Judge Taylor might have had his reasons for naming him? This was a thought. Court-appointed defenses were usually given to Maxwell Green, Maycomb's latest addition to the bar, who needed the experience. Maxwell Green should have had Tom Robinson's case. You think about that, Miss Maudie was saying. It was no accident. I was sitting there on the porch last night waiting. I waited and waited to see you all come down the sidewalk, and as I waited, I thought Atticus Finch won't win. He can't win. But he's the only man in these parts who can keep a jury out so long in a case like that. And I thought to myself, well, we're making a step. It's just a baby step, but it's a step. Okay. So she's meant, you know, Jem is very much like, everyone is terrible. This is horrible. No one even helped this guy. And Maudie is pointing out that there are people who are good in the town who did want to help. They're talking about court-appointed lawyers there. So if you don't have money to pay for a lawyer, the court will give you one for free. And it's usually like kind of a crappy lawyer, right? They talk about, it's like normally this Maxwell Green person who's like just became a lawyer. But instead, Judge Taylor gives it to Atticus because he knows that Atticus is the person who would have the best chance of properly defending Tom. Okay, so and she's saying that like it's, you know, it's a baby step. Like, yes, he was still found guilty, and yes, that's still horrible, but the fact that the jury even deliberated for so long is showing that like maybe we're making a little bit of progress towards having some of this prejudice go away. Okay. And then at the end of the chapter, Miss Stephanie comes in and she's got some dramatic gossip to share. So what is she telling them that happened at the end of the chapter? What happened to Atticus? He gets threatened, right? Page 290 at the very bottom, it says, Miss Stephanie, it was Miss Stephanie's pleasure to tell us, this morning, Mr. Bob Ewell stopped Atticus on the post office corner, spat in his face, and told him he'd get him if it took the rest of his life. Okay, so Bob approaches Atticus, spits in his face, and basically threatens, like, I'm going to get you if it's the last thing I do. Okay, so Bob is, even though Tom was found guilty, Bob was kind of made a fool of, right, in the case. Like Atticus, I don't know. He basically says that Bob is like beating his children, right? Kind of airing out all this dirty laundry, saying that they're liars, more or less. So even though Tom was found guilty, Bob is going to still have a grudge against Atticus that he is going to want to get revenge essentially for. Okay. Any questions on chapter 21 or 22?